All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Development Services Forum. I'm using this not to be more formal, but so that we can let everybody enjoy this from the comfort of their own home. If they have not made it in this morning, we'll have these recordings available not just for people who are on the Development Services listserv later, but also for people who might be new applicants who might not have encountered things like the commissions or public art before, who can then refer back to these as resources. So thank you for joining us. Today we are going behind the scenes with our Planning and Design Review Commissions. And first, we'll actually start out with a quick Did You Know? So we always have a few updates. Today's conversation starter is if any of you have anything to report from your perch out in the community in terms of what you're spending time on right now, what's taking up the bulk of your time here in March. Anything worth noting? Yeah.
I'll just say from a,
Here.
so we're recorded. Thank you. Hi, I'm Ethan Bindernagel, Planning Manager here with the city. I guess I'll just say that one of the things that staff is taking a lot of time thinking about and developing is the, those of you may have heard about some housing laws that were passed. Yeah. There are some development standards that we need to think about, develop, and put into practice in place. We are currently working on that. And again, you may have heard about this as the course of those bills become effective in January and through the rest of the year. So that's something that we're taking interest in and working on. So in case you have any questions, let us know.
Anything else to report? All quiet on the rainy front? All right. Yeah, it is raining. That's true too.
That's a good thing. Even though it's sometimes a bad thing.
Right. Exactly. The pluses and the cons. So, all right. So one thing that Kara Batista Rao, who actually manages our sustainability initiatives here at the city, wanted me to mention is that PG&E is actually subsidizing the installation of some EV chargers. There's a couple of criterion for this, so things like you have to have a certain number of parking spaces available, you put some money into the pot to help them purchase the equipment, but they will subsidize some of the purchase and the actual installation if you'd like to get EV chargers at any of your residential or commercial facilities. I have handouts with more information if you're curious, and you can also reach out to her or visit their website to learn more, but that's a shout in case that's something that you're interested in thinking about over the next couple of years.
Is that a charger, you mean for EV stations?
Yes.
You know, it's just interesting.
We had the PG&E representative here, and we talked, and I brought up the question about the chargers, and he said, "I will take care of it," and all that. Never heard back from him. I contacted him at least twice. Oh yes, I will take care of it. Never heard back from him because there was a whole question about, can we get EV charging stations in existing buildings, and that was the thing. And so it's just interesting. I know he said he's overloaded with the Sonoma fire and this and that, but all the reasons. But sometimes we have presenters here that, talk a lot but no action. So that's my personal opinions.
So I would recommend that you I would recommend that you get in contact with Kara because she does have sort of different contacts that maybe she could help you with that. Yeah.
Having driven an electric car for a couple of years, the one thing I want to make sure is that there's those controls over how long people can park in them. I found that when they had the one over on Locust Street Garage and the same car would be there all day, I'd come in with my car and I couldn't park there because to charge because they would just park there all day. So it's just one of those weird things you have to deal with.
That's interesting. Well, thank you. And actually, it's a timely comment about getting in touch with PG&E. So next month, we're going to be inviting all the agencies back in case they have updates that they want to share with us. So I will make sure that I specifically reach out to PG&E to see if we can get somebody from them in town. So the other update that we wanted to share is actually from a public art perspective. So I will be inviting up Steve Huss, who manages a lot of our public art in the city and has some updates to share with all of you and here to answer your questions.
Thank you. Hey, good morning, everybody. So I'm the project or public art program manager here. We're working for Arts and Rec. And I'm not sure if you're all familiar with it, but there is a public art requirement in the city for new development for most new projects, also called 1% for art. And I basically want to talk to you about if you've not experienced this and worked with us before, to encourage you to make the most of this opportunity to enhance your project if it applies to you. There are some exceptions to the 1% valuation calculation, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But essentially, the best way to work with it is to look into it early, talk to us as early as you can in your process. An artist may be, in fact, a collaborative designer on the design of your project, and there are a lot of opportunities you may not have thought about to integrate artwork, and we're here to kind of guide you to those. The other option is a fallback, and that is to contribute the fee in lieu. That would mean basically that if you choose not to or cannot put art on site, you can also contribute your fee to the Public Art Fund. That then is administered by the city Public Art Program and the Arts Commission to create artwork in other locations, public locations. No art on site is required, and actually City Council incentivized that option for the next few years by providing a temporary discount. So up through 2021, if one chooses to go the in lieu route, it's actually only a 0.75% contribution, so 0.75%, and that is based on the final building valuation calculation that the chief building official does. We actually do encourage developers, if their public art budget is going to be something in the range of $50,000 or less, you may want to go in lieu, because often the attendant costs, the additional costs to doing public art on site may outweigh the sort of the advisability of a public art project. At least that's what we found in the city. Because there are costs to doing art on site that may exceed the public art allotment, and those include the review fees that the city public art program is going to do. As you know, when you do a development project, the planning staff, other staff, attorney perhaps, have to charge city review fees, and the arts program staff is definitely going to be doing that as they review your project, prepare it to go to the Arts Commission. Sometimes that's fairly minimal if it's a pretty simple, straightforward project. Sometimes that can be a little bit more. And additional to that, too, we also definitely advise that you work with a professional arts consultant who can help you get the best range of options for artists, to guide you on concept development, placement of this artwork. It's going to save time and money and going to help you as a developer really meet the requirements of the Art Commission. So we can refer you to some consultants. We can also serve as one above and beyond the simple review process that we do for additional cost if you elect to do so. I mentioned the Arts Commission. So the Art Commission is an appointed body by council, and they will review your project if you choose to do on-site artwork at about 3 stages along the way. Sometimes it's less than that, sometimes it's a little bit more than that. I've actually prepared a document that I hope you'll take away with you, which is about enhancing your development project with public art. And it's just hot off the press, and we'll be posting it online pretty soon as well. That talks about some of these details. It spells out where along your process the Arts Commission and the staff are going to have to review it. So the Art Commission, they have a broader perspective. They're really curating a collection of public art for the city. And they are very interested in new ideas and fresh artists, not necessarily the same artists over and over, not necessarily the same kind of projects again and again. But they also very much want to see you putting in the best art for your development, what is really going to help make it distinctive, help enhance it aesthetically, make it more appealing to tenants and to the public. And for that reason, we really do not want to see the same ideas over and over. Let me talk a little bit about the exceptions. So there are a number of exceptions, actually. The requirement of 1% is reduced to 0.5% for art in the case of certain projects like parking. If you're building underground or above ground parking, only 0.5% is required. Hospitals is another exemption, and nonprofit owned and occupied developments as well. Completely exempt are some categories of projects, including residential alterations, all affordable housing, there's no requirement, and also smaller alteration projects where the budget is $500,000 or under. Those don't qualify at all. So just to sum up, here's the takeaways I'd like you to have today. If your project is eligible, we strongly encourage you to consider adding art to it rather than giving in lieu. This is going to provide an aesthetic enhancement and more appeal, and add to the distinctive look and feel of your project. And if you do want to do that, please think about it early on. Contact us as early as you can. Don't wait until you're well along in your presentations, in your development. Even if you're just thinking about it in as early as possible in the design process, it would be great to involve an artist. So we can guide you to your best options in terms of process and artists, talk to you about your timeline, and just give you some advice about that. And again, there's more information in the handout, which is available here, and my card is over here too, so feel free to give me a call. The Walnut Creek is very proud of its growing collection of public art. The Art Commission is very engaged and very active here. There are a lot of cities with a Percent for Art program, but I think you'll see that our collection is a real strong one. It's not huge, but it's getting bigger, and it's also, by the way, if you're interested in taking a closer look at the public art, you'll see a lot of these pink and orange signs around, and you can call in and get an self-guided audio tour. We're also online. If you go to the public art site, through the city site to the Bedford Gallery, you can access this information online too. But really, a lot of remarkable artworks have been commissioned, and with some developers that have mostly been very supportive. And we encourage you to be a part of the public art collection by participating in your next development. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Steve while he's up here? I think the summary of that was call him and chat. So you might be getting a few more phone calls. The other thing that I just wanted to speak to while you're up here is we actually had some visitors yesterday and you'll see them around town, about 150 people who are here in town for the West Coast Urban Forum, which is hosted by the International Downtown Association. And so they are from all up and down the coast, as well as all the way up to Canada, out to Arizona. People from cities and regional economic development agencies who were here in downtown. Staff actually led a walking tour of about 20 of them yesterday to visit a bunch of different spots in downtown, and we just heard over and over again how much of a draw seeing the art around and the kind of interactivity of it was about Walnut Creek, how memorable it was as they were walking by. So kudos to all of you for contributing to that feel. Okay, so I know this feels a little bit like a formal setup because we have to be in council chambers today, so I just want to shake that off and remind us that the goal is that this next portion is actually truly conversational. We have some members here who I know have sat on both sides of this dais as well as come up to present, and our goal is actually to start a conversation around commissions, specifically the DRC and PC, what they look for in projects, and what they're thinking about as they're sitting in these seats. So with that, I'm actually going to pull us up for Design Review Commission first, and I will pull up your presentation. But Ken, I will allow you to announce and introduce.
Thank you.
You can also use this guy if it's easier.
Well, good morning. I'm Ken Naughter. I'm principal planner here on staff with the city. I've been here at City Hall for 30 years. They're about ready to kick me out the door. But been doing project management most of that time. Just moved up into personnel management now, and I get to sit as the secretary to the Design Review Commission now. So that's so it's real exciting. Anything that has a design review component to it in terms of development comes across my desk. So I get to have my hands in all of the projects that are coming forward. I wanted to introduce Joseph Gorney, who is the chair of the Design Review Commission. He's here with me today. We're just going to speak a little bit about the commission, its workings, and kind of what the expectations are, what we're looking for as staff and as the commission as projects come forward. So, real quick, how many here have been to the Design Review Commission?
Lucky you.
Oh, so we don't need to really say anything, is that right? Just real briefly, the first slide here. So the Design Review Commission was approved by the City Council way back in 1973. I wasn't even born then. And it was a break off. You know, the Planning Commission really looked at all of the projects at that point, and then decided we need an actual design review commission to look at certain projects. So that's how long the DRC has been around. The makeup of the commission is made up of 2 architects, 1 landscape architect, and then 2 members at large who have to live in the city limits. So right now, I mentioned our chair is Joseph Gorney. He is one of the architects. We just got 2 new design review commissioners on board about a week ago. Carlos Valia is the other architect who just joined the commission, and down below Casey Case with Gates has just joined the commission. Brian Killian is our official landscape architect. He's been on the commission for off and on for many years. And then Vice Chair Marilyn Weiss is an interior designer, and she lives in Rossmore. So that makes up our design review commission. The purpose, we're really, this is right out of the city ordinances, is to improve the general standards of orderly development, to improve the controls related to planning and building, and to promote development in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare, and to establish standards and policies that will enhance and promote good design and site relationships and other aesthetic considerations, and then, of course, to encourage works of fine art in the project. So shout out to Steve there. So that's really the purpose of the commission. Let's see, punch that button for me again. The responsibilities are to hear and decide applications, make recommendations to the Planning Commission regarding tentative maps, conditional use permits, and rezonings, and then to make recommendations then to the Arts Commission regarding artwork. So basically, the Design Review Commission considers in a development all of the aspects of site layout, grading, hardscape, landscaping, tree impacts, building architecture, colors, materials, lighting, signage, and then public art recommendations. What the Design Review Commission does not get involved in, or should not be too involved in, is land use issues, circulation, parking, how the particular use relates to uses around it, that kind of thing. But the physical aspects are more in line with what the Design Review Commission is charged with looking at. Said again, I think I'm gonna, let's see. Real quick, some of the things that the staff is looking for when a project comes in and files for design review is going to be a complete submittal package. And what that means is we're looking for, obviously, the plans. We're looking for the application to be filled out. We're looking for any reports or studies that might need to come along with that application. Tree report, acoustical study, those kinds of things are very helpful at the beginning if we can get those filed up front. Some other tips at the actual commission. We're hoping that your entire team can come to the commission in order to answer questions, especially if you've got a landscape architect, if you've got a civil engineer. Those kinds of things are very important to have the team come to the commission if that's possible. And then come with a PowerPoint if you can, and prepare to sell the project. Be prepared to answer questions and to really sell the project to the commission. in terms of what staff is going to be doing, we are going to be looking at the proposal. We're going to be looking at how it fits in or complies with the general plan, the zoning ordinance, specific plans, and generally how it works in the context of its surrounding area. Staff is going to be really responsible for contacting the applicant, making the site visit, writing the staff reports, and making the recommendations that will come to the commission in that aspect. So I think I'm gonna turn it over to Joseph at this point, and I will stay up here in case there are any other questions.
Thanks, Ken. Very thorough presentation. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to tell you the truth. It was interesting. I just learned a couple things when I was up there. I learned what year we were established by council, and technically what our official role is, which I don't think I've ever seen before. So I thought that was kind of I'm now awakened to what my real role is. And I just want to mention, because of council, you know, I've been on Design Review Commission for 18 years. I'm in my 18th year, I believe, and I've been on twice before and served with some of the people in this room, and I'm chair for the 4th time now. And again, being chair is very different. I just want to mention, if you like what we do, I'm to credit. If you don't like what we do, you can blame council. And so, one of the things about it is that, we've had an interesting makeup over the years. We once had a developer on. Steve Cortese was on our commission for a while. It was really good to have a developer on the commission because he just brought a different perspective, particularly when it came to real cost and real context and what was going on in the community. And I thought that was a good person to have on there. So if any of you or people you know ever want to be on a commission, this is a good one to join, because it's great to have that perspective on there. As Ken said, the site planning, the architecture, trees, signs wind up being a big thing that we deal with quite a bit. And also, a lot of what we do is sort of send things forward to Planning Commission for their approval. So anytime we have a really difficult thing, we punt it to them so they can take care of it. It's definitely true about the applications being complete. But a lot of times lately, we really like to have study sessions on projects that are critical to the city. And I don't know whether this is a staff thing or very times it comes from the developer. A lot of people want to push the project ahead really quickly. So we wind up seeing photometrics and all the C3 calculations and everything at a study session. And it's extremely hard for us to look at a project like that and say, geez, they just spent $80,000 on consultants, but really it doesn't make sense on its site planning. So we don't like to turn those projects away, but we do, and usually we get a lot of flack for it. But again, if you're doing a project and you're working with staff, we think staff here does a great job. I work in a lot of different cities. I think staff does a wonderful job. But there are times when, if the developer's pushing the limits or doing something a little unusual, it really is nice to be able to bring it to Design Review Commission early. Short staff report, just kind of weigh in on some of the options. We've asked before to see some of the early sketches, and we just think that sometimes it's very important to do if you're trying to push something, and staff may have a different opinion about it. And so, we love staff, we really do. We like them to call us in. If they're struggling with a project, we try to make ourselves available to come in and talk to staff in the upstairs and just kind of say, yeah, I think generally this is going in the right direction. A lot of applicants try to come to see us individually. I personally don't like to do that unless I'm asked to by council, because I just, it's really, another big part about what we do is to listen to the public. I mean, we're given the role by the council, but really it's when the public comes in, we have neighbors to deal with, we have other people, and I don't like this sort of almost backroom dealing thing. So I just really love to make everything we do public. And that's a big part of what we do. And Terry and I were talking about this earlier. There's times when the public maybe is pushing too far. They don't want to see anything, but it's zoned right, and it's in the general plan, and they live in a neighborhood where multifamily is going to be encouraged and is allowed. And so one of the things that I've had in meetings is we've done meetings where people have come up at the end of the meeting and said, you didn't vote the way I liked, but I felt that you listened to us. And that, for me, that's like the best thing they could say, because our goal is to not just stop the project because the neighbors don't want to see that thing there. We want to work with the neighbors. We want to make sure the project responds to their needs, but they have to realize they're all going to be, living there together in the future. So we try to make them come together whenever possible. One of the other responsibilities we do as design review is to this sort of cross commission communication. We try to have meetings together with planning commission on certain hot topics so that we sort of are all on the same page. I think that's very helpful. Science subcommittee, as I said earlier, is a big one. Working, we usually have somebody on the general plan committee. We do a lot of specific plans in town, which is, and again, specific plans, I know a lot of you know, but they're really there to benefit the developers and the builders in the neighborhood, because if you can set up some of the environmental things and you can almost streamline the process so everybody knows what is expected, it just makes it a lot less risky for a developer to go in on a piece of property and buy it knowing what they're going to be able to get, hopefully. Let's see. And again, one of the things is that I'm on both sides of this thing. I present to a lot of different towns, and so I sit on both sides. I always find that if I'm in a design review commission, I'd rather get a 4-to-1 vote or a 3-to-2, because it sort of means I'm pushing the limits. I find that in Walnut Creek, a lot of times we mostly vote together. I think that by the time we get through it, I think staff, whether most of the things the staff comes up with we agree with and we talk about, but I think in general most of our commission votes together. We now have 2 new members. We were going to have 3, which really changes the outlook a lot. We also have Carlos on there, so now we have a sexy accent on our commission. He's Colombian and he just has a great accent. We love him. And so some of the new changes we're also dealing with, which Ethan hit on, is this whole thing about new rules coming down from the state on housing, and they're going to have a huge impact possibly on some projects downtown. It's definitely going to be a lot more work for the city to be able to get their general plan moving forward and their housing element, and so design review and planning commission are definitely part of that process, and we think it's important to keep us in on that. And that's, again, as you all know, most of the things we see are large projects. We don't see a lot of single-family residences or residential additions unless it's not designed by a licensed architect and oversized. So those are the only ones we normally see. And a lot of times those are dealt with at staff level, with staff. So again, what I try to do in a commission, what we try to move people forward. I mean, even if we have issues on certain things, it's always good to say, well, really it's this detailing or this sunshade or this window or these materials. We really try to get it so the developer can move forward, whether it's in engineering or getting things more developed, and just to get a sense that they're going to be able to do what they want, and also to be clear. I don't like when if you have too many different opinions, we like to almost take a straw vote to say, it makes sense that 3 of us really agree with this idea, so you may want to work on that. What it really winds up not being is a list of things you have to do. We've had projects that come back before, and they'll say, well, Commissioner A said put a band here. Commissioner B said change the window color. Commissioner C said change the roof design. And you'll get those 3 things, and you'll wind up with a horrible project. It's like a Frankenstein project at that point. And so that's one of the things we always try to tell people is, take it all in, make the project better. And a lot of times we ask people, if we've said something specific in the meeting before, respond to it in the next meeting if there's a next meeting, so we know that you looked at it and took it into consideration. Again, we're the fun commission. We like what we do. We're designers. There's only 5 of us. So hopefully we're not a scary commission, and we want to keep it that way. So that's really it for the presentation. We're definitely here to answer questions, and so ask away.
Great. So if we have about 5 minutes worth of questions, anybody want to hop in? I can ferry the mic around if need be.
There's got to be some, because you guys have all, so many of you have been to commission.
So what Ethan mentioned and what you referred to just now in terms of the state housing laws is that in order to get more housing, both affordable and market rate housing, the state there's been a lot of bills passed that are pushing towards streamlining the process to a point of kind of by right housing. So what we're talking about doing is taking our design guidelines and incorporating them and making them objective standards, such that it's becomes a requirement rather than an ask. And that doesn't mean that you don't have options to won't have options in which to make it, to push the limits or go beyond or not quite meet those standards. It just means that if you want to do it differently, then you can go through the normal process, which would be through a design review. So we're, trying to adhere to state law, but we also want to preserve the ability for designers to come up with creative ideas. So anyway, that's just wanted to.
We keep wondering whether it's ugly is an objective criteria.
Joseph, can you talk a little bit about the role of the DRC in terms of recommendations for site planning and some of the issues that tread on land use? Because obviously you as design professionals are for the most part urban planners too, and eminently more qualified to talk about land use and site planning than most of the planning commission members, with the notable exception of some of the land use attorneys that have been really, really valuable in the past. And explain the role of DRC and what the applicant can expect and what kind of weight that carries.
Well, one of the things that we look at also is you can always tell when a project has the landscape architect, the engineer, and the architect working together on the project. And so we can always tell when the landscape architect was brought in early enough that the way the landscape is designed is integrated with the site planning of the building, almost to the point where if the landscape architect was brought in early enough, they work back and forth and change the project. You can always tell when a project's come in and they just sort of shrubbed it up at the end, and so for us, that's a big part of it. And again, we had a project recently, and it becomes things like, if the project is connected to the street in some way, how are the walkways done? Does it connect to the street like the rest of the neighborhood does? Does it feel like it's integrated into the neighborhood? If you're dealing with although we're seeing a lot of multifamily projects going into single-family home, what seems like single-family home subdivisions. And so the idea of doing a project like that where you look at the whole streetscape and you realize that, yes, even though it's multifamily, scale-wise it works with the rest of the neighborhood. That becomes an important site planning issue. Also on site planning, you have, knowing what the criteria was around it. If there's a noise coming from one end and the building is sort of pushed in a certain direction, where the sun comes in and how that relates to the site. We don't see a lot of that, but we do with the architecture more than the landscape. But again, and also sometimes at the project, everybody wants to maximize what they can get on the project, and we do support that. I would say we're pretty pro-development, but definitely, a lot of the presentations start with the site plan. They start with how you came to this site plan, and then kind of layer on the architecture. So I think that's always important to start with that. Terry, follow up.
So I'm actually going to pause us for a moment here. This is a great transition point for us to talk a little bit about Planning Commission, and then we should be able to reopen it up for questions for both at the very end.
I just want to admit, I have a meeting at 9:30, so I may be bugging out a little early, so I apologize for that.
We'll end by 9, so you're good to go.
Sure, we will.
Relatively good to go. All right.
Great,
we never end on time.
So, good. I'm going to go with this instead. Good morning again, Ethan Bindernagel, the planning manager here in Walnut Creek. And as secretary to the Planning Commission, I'm joined here by Cindy Darling, who was recently elected by her peers to be the chair of the commission for the next year through next March. Currently, the composition of the Planning Commission generally is 7 members, all residents of Walnut Creek, hailing from various sectors of the economy and professional abilities. Currently, whereas we used to have quite a few we had, I think, at one point 3 land use attorneys on the commission, which was helpful, provided an interesting perspective and thought process. We now have another set of thoughtful perspectives. We have 3 developers active. Their day jobs are as developers on the commission currently, so nearly half of the commissioners are developers in their daytime work. We also have a real estate broker who is also a hospitality consultant, so an interesting perspective there, and a local resident who lives in the Almond Shoey. He's our most recent appointment to the Planning Commission to fill actually the shoes for Matt Francois, who termed out of that commission. So the composition is an interesting one. Cindy can talk a bit to her background and her approach and view. But I want to give some context for the Planning Commission, what its role is. As Ken mentioned, the role and the duties of the Design Review Commission. Planning Commission is relegated to the role and responsibility of land use, established in 1930, essentially in response to a wave of early 20th century activism and laws that were passed in court cases. And I won't bore you with the gory details, except to say that there was a lot of concern about use, land use, in the early part of the 20th century, and how do we handle that, and separation of uses. Euclid v. Ambler, 1926, Supreme Court case, monumental, foundational to land use. 1930, we established our own planning commission. All right, so there's a response there. Been around a while is the point. So what's the job? They prepare and review and make recommendations to the city council on matters pertaining to general plans, which we all know about. We have a general plan in place since 2006. Be updating that soon. Also recommending for adoption any specific plans that come down the pike, and any changes to zoning. And we've seen all of these actually in recent years. In fact, we have 2 large specific plans barreling their way through the process. We've had amendments to the business park zone. We had creation of new zoning districts recently related to the West Downtown specific plan. So a lot of these are current topics for the Planning Commission. And also there are opportunities and requirements for the Planning Commission to opine, weigh in, recommend to council on any other matters rising. And perfect example would be the state laws that were just passed. If there are other duties in response to either council priorities or state initiatives or laws that have been passed. So Planning Commission has a very active role and important role here in the city. I want to touch upon some of those housing laws and other things. I want to be clear. The density bonus law, for example, is gaining a lot of attention lately. Housing Accountability Act, you might say, what's that? These things have been around for quite a while. Density bonus since 1979 just hasn't been used. And the reason being is that it just wasn't practical from a financial standpoint for developers in the past. And now with land values where they are, especially communities like Walnut Creek, it makes more sense. The reason it makes sense is there's some concessions and waivers associated with those. And that is attractive for some developers who can actually make a project pencil based on some of those provisions and, again, on economic conditions. Similarly, housing accountability, it's been around since 1982. Now, there have been some tweaks in the recent raft of housing bills that allowed them, made some minor changes. But again, it comes back to Sandy's point, the point Joseph made, and the point I'm making now. The objective design standards are a real important key feature, especially as we look at the opportunities to streamline. City wants to make sure that we don't end up kind of giving up the spirit of our intent of having a design review commission by not having those standards in place. So we're working on that, and we'll continue to work on those issues. Ken gave a nice outline to say what can you do and how can we all work together. And I'll just really, I don't want to repeat, but I'll just kind of echo some of the points. And I think I would emphasize communication on your side and ours, keeping in communication early and often, whether you're coming to do a design review presentation with a study session early on, or you're coming at the tail end to talk to the Planning Commission about parking or transportation or whatever the case, or access or whatnot. The communication angle is important, and I think the benefit, and we are happy to provide the materials, but the benefit to you as a development team would be to educate yourselves on our general plan and some of the policies that may apply, or look at our zoning. And I encourage you to challenge us. Ask us questions. That's what we're here for. Ask us, well, how does that apply here, or is there an exception there, or I noted somewhere else in the code, etc. Having an educated applicant is one of our best, is a really great attribute. And it really helps to make a project better, and it challenges staff, and we're up to the challenge. But it challenges us to make sure that we're getting a really great project. Some of my staff is here in the back. I'm thrilled to have them. I think we have a great staff. I'll echo that point Joseph made, but I'm biased. But I will say I think we have a really talented staff, a lot of years of experience from Ken on down. People who've been here a long time, seen a lot of change. So I'm going to stop rambling at this point and invite Cindy to address you, and then be happy to answer any questions.
Can I switch over and use this one?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm Cindy Darling. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission right now. This is my second tour of duty, and I have been on the commission for an extraordinary long time because of some alignment of things, so I have 2 more years left. As Ethan said, we all come to the Planning Commission. We're all residents of Walnut Creek. We all come from a variety of perspectives. It is sad that we've lost our land use attorney perspectives because those guys were really good at helping us understand a few issues. But we do have Peter Lezak in the back as one of our commissioners, and he's project developer. My background is I came from state and federal government, and I worked on water and endangered species issues. And so when I retired out of the state, I said, you know, I want to deal with something far simpler. And I came and decided to apply for the Planning Commission. And part of my experience, I worked with San Joaquin County when they were doing their habitat conservation plan. And from that experience, I saw the real downside for the Bay Area itself not planning for its growth and not letting people build things because they didn't want people here. People would drive for 2 hours to go live in Tracy. People would go to Mountain House. People would go to places, ridiculous lengths to find a place to live. And from an environmental perspective, because that is my background, it makes much more sense to have people live closer to where they work. It's, you know, far less impact on the environment. So that was the perspective I had when I came here. Our planning commission, our tradition has been, we're a very collegial bunch. We like to listen to projects. We like to hear from the developers. We like to hear from the community. We like to talk amongst ourselves and see if we could reach some kind of common understanding of a project and reach some kind of agreement. A couple things that you as developers are really be useful for us to hear from you. Every developer I've ever met with in my past life, you ask them to do something and they would say no. Developers very rarely say, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, we'll give you an extra 20 acres or whatever. But it really is helpful for the Planning Commission if you come in with your project and when there's something that you're not able to do, you include the words because and but. Because I can't do this because I need a certain unit count to make my financing work. Because I've worked out with the neighbors and they don't want me to do access on that side. So explain the becauses and then their buts. I can't do that, but I can do this. I can't do a step back because the construction of my project precludes that big of a step back, but we can reorient these couple units and give better perception that it's not looming over the street. So think about your becauses and your buts when you come to us. Be ready to answer traffic, parking, traffic, parking, traffic, parking, traffic, parking, parking, and traffic. Because that's what we as planning commissioners hear from the community. And it's one of the challenges that we all have to deal with as downtown densifies. We need to make sure that it retains its livability, that people are still feel comfortable coming downtown, that they have a place to park, that they're not going to get, run over and all that. So traffic, parking, traffic, parking, traffic, parking. The other thing to always think about is, especially where commercial or multifamily residential butts up against the single family neighborhood, look over your fences, who's the person on the other side. Make sure that when you come to us, you have not just sent them a postcard, that you've rung their doorbell. Because if they come in and when you're in front of us and have an issue and haven't talked to you about it, part of our job is to listen to them and to listen to their issues. And if they haven't worked something out with you, or you guys don't have an understanding of where the differences are between the two of you, chances are we're going to say, go talk, and then come back. We are not always going to say that the neighbors are right. We're not always going to say that you guys are right, but we want to make sure that there's been enough conversation so that the two sides understand each other and can clearly lay out what the options are. One of the other things that in my past life as a regulator, I would always tell my staff is if somebody brings you a project and you don't like it, you can't just tell them that you don't like it. It's like having somebody bring you a rock and you say, I don't like this rock, go bring me another rock. Well, they have no idea, was the rock too big? Was it made out of the wrong material? Does it the wrong color? So we try to give you as clear an idea as possible. If you brought us a rock that we don't like, what kind of rock should you go out? How should you adjust yourself to bring it back to us? And if you're in front of us and you're not understanding that, let us know, and we'll try to be as clear as possible. But we always try to do that. Anyway, it's a great community. I love Walnut Creek. I think many of you have come up with some really creative, interesting projects in recent years, and I'm enjoying my the last couple of years on the planning commission, so. Right.
Thank you so much. So with that, I just want to make sure that we have some time for questions to open it up to everybody. Yes, Peter.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the role of the commissions in the city, and particularly the Design Review Commission, because there's a division of expertise between these two commissions that I think is very appropriate. As a developer, I'm very concerned, though, that in Walnut Creek, the entitlement process takes much longer than it needs to. And that's a function of going back to commissions multiple times. I totally agree that the perspective of the commission is appropriate and the citizen input is very important to the process. But I feel like sometimes the commissions make comments and bring you back that maybe we could avoid that process by having some kind of condition made that the developer could work out with staff, as opposed to having to come back to the commission to see that little detail. And Walnut Creek maybe is one of those few places where I would probably feel comfortable working with staff on most of those issues. So I'd like to hear your perspective, and maybe Ethan's perspective as well, on when that might be appropriate, and how we could try to expedite projects by doing a little bit more of that. Thank you.
I will say that on a lot of projects now, we, at the end of the project, if we have only a few small items that need to be dealt with, we will oftentimes give it to staff for approval, but a lot of times we put together a subcommittee of 2 commissioners. And we've done this, I would say, maybe 20, even 25% of our projects, and I'd say almost half the projects that are of a larger scale downtown, we have a subcommittee of 2 normally to be able to take care of it. And if it's landscape or site planning issues, we'll put our landscape architect on it. If it's architecture, we'll have the architects on it. But it always has to be items that are fairly minor enough that they're more design oriented versus site planning, because it really those are things that the public maybe wouldn't necessarily comment on. So I would say on most of the projects we do that, and I think that we've even had developers request that during the meeting to be able to say, we think that this is something we can work out. Here's a couple of options. As Cindy was saying, yes, we know we can't do this, but we have, here's some ideas. We know we can work it out. And so I think that the subcommittee process has been the one that's been helped the most. I think we only really send projects to come back. One of the issues we do have is that a lot of projects come to design review first. We comment on it, then it goes, and then several weeks later it goes to planning commission, or the next week, planning commission comments on it, and then it has to come back to design review commission for final approval. And for us also is the key is that first meeting, it's clear what the developer has to do. If the developer is fuzzy on it, it goes through all the other commissions, come back to us, and we were like, no, that's not really what we wanted. And again, in a study session, we try to keep a little looser, make sure the applicant can come even at the end. Normally we close the public hearing and that's it. But if I hear things going on that may not be clear to the developer, I like to reopen the public hearing and have that discussion. But I think the subcommittee process has been really helpful on that.
Yeah, and I think there's a balance. I mean, study sessions are great because it's that early consultation that really can help guide a project. But on the other hand, if you start doing a study session with 2 commissions and then approval through 2 commissions, you've chewed up a tremendous amount of calendar. Yes. We used to, in my past life, we dealt with Tahoe, and if you want to see a morass, it's Lake Tahoe. And so we'd have a multi-agency collaborative effort where we'd meet with the developers ahead of time and say, okay, TERPA, Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife Service, and try to work it out. I don't know if there's a similar model that would work in Walnut Creek, but that's something that, if you want to think about joint study sessions or something like that. And I don't know, there's different ways you can do it. And I know as a planning commission, we try, if we have something that we don't agree on, that really is more in the purview of design review, we'll just say handle it in design review when you go through the final time. I think that's what we did with Volvo on the lighting and the conflicts with the neighbors. So we do that sometimes. We could probably do it more. And feel free to ask for that if you if the applicant comes to us and thinks that what we're talking about is something that they could work out with staff. So.
I wanted to add one quick, pardon me. Just want to add one quick point. You may have heard through this forum or at council meetings or whatnot, we have a blueprint for success that we've been working on. We've mentioned it here before. There are initiatives in there that explore ideas such as encouraging more joint planning commission, design review commission meetings, whether it's relegated to affordable housing projects or other projects. With entitlements, I can point to a specific example at Broadway Plaza where we had a $350 million investment in our community. And what we did in terms of entitlement review and building permit was we combined the process. So there was one submittal for one set of plans that we worked off of as an entitlement set, but also were able to go through the building permit set process. And we really tried to streamline that experience for Broadway Plaza. But the underlying theme and the current in all of this is that we do have standards that have been established and rules and regulations. And so staff really does try to find that balance between being accommodating and understanding of a developer's perspective, but also understanding and being mindful of the community's vision as established in the general plan, as implemented by council through zoning changes, et cetera. So we do try to work that balance. I'm not turning a blind eye or a tin ear to this. I hear what you're saying, and we've heard it from developers, and we really have tried to change the culture around being more communicative early on in the process, streamlining the extent that we can streamline with respect to meeting dates and other things. But I think there's an equal responsibility on the developer's part to hear us and to make changes. And I'm not suggesting you're not, but it's an equal partnership there in that respect. And so it works better when we're all informed and working together and staying in communication. And so I would try to emphasize those points. I guess I'll just leave it at there. I think it's a matter of working collaboratively, and we're trying to be more collaborative in our approaches. And I hope that's coming across. And if it's not, let's continue to talk about it. But I think we are trying to we've amended our code, for example, to change up to loosen land use restrictions in the business park, to no longer require frontage improvements for single-family residential developments, single-family homes. Among other things, we're trying, but government can be an incremental, slower process. So I ask your patience, but please understand that we hear you. And we've put out a document there explaining that we've heard you, and we will continue to hear you, provided you're also hearing us. So.
Other questions? Sandy, sorry, we're going to go here first, and then I will. Okay, sure. No, okay.
I'm Kurt Blumstrand with Lennox Homes, and I'm just going to jump back to public art. And we do smaller built projects, and I'm doing the second public art on Trinity project. And I just want to say I worked with Steve on both projects and worked very well. But it's one of the things that's just been interesting. We've learned together that every developer is becoming cost conscious, and we're just trying to put the lid on the cost. And so one of the things we learned in this last project was we had public art, and it's 1%, and we did an estimate what we thought the building will be. And this is what then we would go out and find some young artist and trying to come up with a price parameter. But in doing so, we did purchase the art and all that, and then Steve and I learned that all the fees or the charges for staff and so forth, so the public art was, say, something like $31,000, and all of a sudden we had $10,000, which we never figured. We bought the public art for the $31,000, so we had $41,000. So Steve and I, we looked at it, and he came up with a program. He said, look, we will give you an estimate of what the fees will be, and then we can do a residual work back, and so that is the amount that we can spend for art. And we're paying 100%, and we wanted to have it on the site. So that works out. Once the developer says, okay, here's our fee, it's $41,000, we work it back, here's the charges, we have delivery, we have all these things, and then we know what we need to spend. And so Steve was very cooperative, came up with his plan, and I think in the future, any developer that wants to come and do a site public art, he will have a better idea, and he has a lid on that cost. And I just want to commend that the staff for working with us and coming up with a much better way of doing it.
I, for one, I'm glad to hear that. I like when the art is included in the building. I'm never a big fan of in lieu fees. I know the city sometimes likes it because they can get bigger projects done, but for me personally, I like it on site.
I know we are coming to the end of the hour here. Feels like we're just starting to crack open the lid on some of these conversations, so I encourage people to stay, to continue chatting, and to continue this conversation at future forums. And just a big thank you to our guests here for coming this morning and sharing your perspective. So thank you all for coming.
I think it would cause a butt.